gonna go racing, boys.
Rubbin's racing, right?
Like, what an experience too to see that, like the shop up close like that.
Mr. Hill, like ninth grade agriculture teacher, can't thank you enough. Even though I didn't make A's all year, yeah, that was pretty much so one of those highlights of life.
There it is. There's the cymbal clash and the start to the episode. I don't know if I started going back and watching these too. Like, not to say that we don't watch them while we edit, right? Looking at these episodes, but it's funny to watch every single time we're headbanging. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was like subconsciously doing it, but like now I notice it and now I want to do it, and now I add
automatically. It just automatically you just start headbanging. Yeah, I love it.
It's incredible. Well, welcome back into the Twisted Eras podcast. Rob Stott alongside Doug Marsh, and continuing to bring you different things from different eras. And today we've got a good one. Today we're gonna go racing, boys. Are you ready to go racing, Mr. Marsh?
That's right. Rubbin's racing, right?
Rubbin is racing. Oh my God, so many ways we can go with this, but something that has a lot of significance to both of us. But it's funny because the ways we're approaching this episode are similar to how we approached the wrestling one, right? But from your seat instead of mine. So it's that thing that we both had some early years of being into and enjoying, but fall out of, and then a pandemic comes around, and what do you know, you're back at it.
It's wild. Something that was so important to me as a kid and as a teenager and stuff like that, I did truly lose interest. And the pandemic, it brought me back. It really did. They were the first, I think, major sports league to come back because they were forward thinking, going,
they're isolating themselves.
We are
week to week,
not around anybody else. Yeah, and they were able to get the governor of South Carolina to open up Darlington, and they ran Darlington, I think, 4 times that year over the course of 2 weeks. They even had a midweek. They had 2 midweek races.
Wild.
It was incredible, and it was the first time that the main series for NASCAR had a midweek race in 40 years or something like that. That was not on the 4th of July, which they would run back in the day.
Yeah.
But it was amazing because there was nothing on. There was no sports, and you had NASCAR. You had NASCAR on Sunday, and then you had NASCAR on Wednesday, then you had NASCAR on Sunday, then you had NASCAR on Thursday. It was incredible, and so it really did. It brought me back, got my interest level back up. I've since the pandemic, I've been to multiple races, and I had not been to a race in over 20 years, I think it was.
Wow.
So pretty wild how the pandemic changed, so many different things. But that's how I got back into it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And to weave in other conversations we've had, it's another sport, if you will, that has had to go through some serious evolution as it looks to bring back fans, right?
Right.
So I harken back to the baseball conversation about the rule changes and things that baseball's done to not necessarily. I mean, baseball's done it to speed up the sport. NASCAR, you can't really speed up. Race is only going to be as long once you hit that 500-mile mark.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
That's all.
That's right.
That's your finish line. It's a set determination of how long this event is going to be, but they've done things to try to more so keep people interested throughout the course of a race as well as course of a season.
That's right. These things, all sorts of different things to try to get, more people involved in just the last 10 laps, because that's always been the reason people watch. They watch for the wrecks and they watch for the last 10 laps. And so they've done a lot of stuff. You're right. And to try to get more people to come back. So it'll be interesting to go through the eras and,
for sure,
talk about the changes and such.
Well, let's start with your earliest memory.
Yeah. So as we've talked about in previous podcasts, Rob's up in Philly and I am in North Carolina, and North Carolina is essentially the
hub, the mecca of NASCAR.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
The
host of NASCAR racing.
Well, here's the thing. Is there battles between, because I know we'll also get into there's different types of racing, and this would be a big point of it, right? So North Carolina is definitely NASCAR's kind
Hmm?
of, their hub where they exist. Any battles between like who's the bigger racing town between Charlotte and Indy? You
I
know?
would say no, because NASCAR is definitely the number one. The Indy 500 is huge, granted,
Hmm.
worldwide. But if you look at actual, uh, Nielsen ratings and stuff like that, the Daytona 500 almost doubles it. So,
Yeah.
granted, the Daytona 500 is in the winter when it's not as much challenge. The Super Bowl has just ended. It's the week after. There's nothing going against it. So it usually gets a pretty good number where,
Indy
Indy
Memorial Day
500 is in
weekend.
Memorial Day
Yeah.
weekend. And so that. But anyway, I think, that when you think of even the IndyCar teams that are owned by both,
Yeah.
they're in Charlotte or they're in
Right.
Mooresville,
Yeah.
so
Well, also
it's
they try to get their drivers to go to both, like
it's right.
do that 1,100 miles of racing in a single day, a feat we
That's
haven't
right.
seen in quite some time. But
Yeah, well,
um,
it's on the schedule for
yeah,
this year.
it will be
Kyle
interesting.
Larson's gonna make a
Give it
run
an
at it.
attempt.
But yeah, but so I'm here, I'm about an hour north of Charlotte. And so the majority of teams are in Charlotte, but there was one really big one here in my backyard. Richard Childress was a Davidson County guy. He built his shop here in the 70s. I can remember, I don't know if you guys in Philly had Riff, Reading is Fundamental,
Yeah.
where you would have a free
Didn't it
book
have a
day or
dog
whatever.
as a
They
mascot?
did.
Yeah.
Had a
That,
dog as a
yeah.
mascot and everything. And
Riff Ruff
he,
or Riff
yeah,
something
yes,
like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
So he brought the books in one day in his race car. He drove the number 3 CRC car back in the day. I think it was a competitor to STP, but that was his sponsor. And he whoa, 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 pulled in the backyard
Man.
of the school and packed with books. And so
Oh,
that's what I grew up in. I grew up in that world. And he was not that great a race car driver. I think he'll tell you that. So
a better owner for sure.
he definitely turned
Yeah.
out to be a much better owner, but he built his shop right down the road in Welcome.
Wow.
And so RCR is still there. It's still in Welcome. It's much bigger now than it was when I was a kid. Actually, Colleague Racing is on that campus as well. You got both RCR and Colleague there in Welcome, North Carolina, which is where my high school was at. High school was about a mile and a half down the road from RCR shop.
Mm,
My house is probably 4 or 5 miles from the shop. So that's
man.
that's how I grew up. Grew up there in this hotbed of racing. And we also, when you say NASCAR, you automatically think of the Cup, but NASCAR
Yeah.
series were everywhere. All sorts of local series and stuff. And here also in our area was one of the original short tracks in Bowman Gray Stadium. And Bowman Gray Stadium is iconic. Been multiple documentaries made on the Madhouse
Yeah.
and the craziness that goes on. But so my first NASCAR memory is at Bowman Gray Stadium,
Wow.
and it's a great one. I was about 4, so I think it's 1977, and we were going to the races, and we went to we got my neighbor, my mom and dad, and me, and the one of the things that's so different from NASCAR than football, baseball, basketball is the ability to bring stuff in. It's
Yeah.
very fan
Yeah.
friendly. It shocks people to see people come in with coolers of their own drinks and food and stuff like that, but that's part of it. And so even back then in the 70s, so my pops had a beautiful, gosh, I'd love to have it now, Pabst Blue Ribbon cooler, had the
Oh,
logo and had this beautiful blue top on it, and I remember this thing vividly. So we packed that thing with, drinks and stuff. And we're sitting there watching the races. And it was the most amazing thing for this, 4-year-old kid. And of course, in the South in July, pop-up storms happen immediately. And so we're watching the race. The next thing you know, it is one of those torrential downpours, right? And we all take a run up for cover. And I turn around, it's just me and my mom. I'm like, I don't see my dad. I don't see his buddy. And we look over, and my dad and his buddy are still sitting there with that Pabst Blue Ribbon cooler over top of their head. It's still one of my favorite. It's one of the first memories I have.
keep
It's
the
still one of my
cool in and the
favorites.
wet out.
Oh, it was amazing. And it just, I still bust out laughing every time thinking about seeing these two crazy people sitting down there with that cooler lid over their head in the pouring rain. But yeah, probably a little bit of that. But that's my first
Oh man, that's
NASCAR
incredible.
memory at that short track at Bowman Gray Stadium back in 1977.
And there's so many. You mentioned those small tracks, those short tracks. The first thing that comes to mind today about those is the Earnhardt series that he was running for a little while on the lost tracks of NASCAR and just racing
Yes.
and how awesome it is that the investigation. I know he's got a team that's doing it for him now. Like the first season, he was trying to go to all of them, but that series of just finding the old tracks like there's so many that stand out, but like him retracing the steps of the old Daytona beach
Yes.
track, the track on the
Yes.
beach and then onto the street right off of the beach and just what that was like and um you know seeing what they've become. It's almost like you think of those pictures of and I most people have probably seen them like the old Olympic venues in towns that you go back to like Beijing and the 2008 arenas and how overgrown they are and like
Yeah.
unused these tracks and kind of what they've become and like you could still see maybe like you know if it's built up around it like the area the Daytona one's a great example because that street now has housing along it and but like the strip's still there like the
Yeah.
strip of track is still there where the asphalt is and
That's right.
just neat to
That's
see
right.
but you got a lot
And I
of those
think
in your area too.
yeah, well, there was the Lost Speedways. He did do several in our area, but luckily Bowman Gray is not one of them,
Right.
and it still packs in 20,000 people, about 12
Mhm.
Saturday nights a year. They only race during the summer.
Yep.
It is very specific. We're going to race May, June, July, and first week of August, and that's it. That's
Mhm.
all you get. But man, it packs it in with modifieds and stuff like that. But
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that where NASCAR was going to do their All Star race, or did like wasn't there
it's
something
it
about that?
they have thought about possibly doing the Clash there. The
Okay,
track's a little too small to get more than get a full field on there. So
gotcha.
they did the All-Star race in North Wilkesboro, which is
That's right.
about an
That's right.
hour north. Yeah. It's funny where I sit there at one point in time were four tracks all within about an hour. You had
Yeah,
Martinsville above me, you had North Wilkesboro to the west, you had Rockingham kind of to
yeah,
the southeast, and then you had Charlotte right to the south. So four tracks. There were 8 races annually within a
yeah.
1 hour circle of our house.
A
So it was
legitimate hotbed for racing.
Oh,
It's
it
unbelievable.
was. And if you throw Darlington in there, that's just maybe 2.5 hours away. It's not that far. And technically Richmond's only 4 hours away. So
Yeah,
you had and Bristol's right at four
yeah.
hours too.
Jeez.
So
How
you know,
Talladega isn't that is that or
Talladega is a
a
little
little
further.
further? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, you had all these amazing tracks right there. And but to be fair, they're all incredible. But
Yeah.
my first cup memory, I think I was around 10 years old, and it was a TV memory. It's
Okay.
I think one of the amazing things about racing in general is when they put cameras on cars and put cameras in these wild places. And I think it's the 83 Daytona 500. Kerry Yarborough has the camera in his car, and most of the guys were pretty superstitious about the cameras in their car when they first started because it added like 200 pounds. You had to
Oh yeah.
adjust things to get there, and I don't think any of the big guys had done it. And they got Kale to do it, and he wins.
Hmm.
And I think he is the first person to win, with a camera in his car. Or
That's
I
crazy.
know it's the first Daytona 500 winner with a
Right.
camera in his car. But I just remember it's like, 9-year-old watching this thing. It was like, that was the coolest thing to see from inside the car,
Yeah.
and the camera was terrible. Now we've got these amazing
Right.
cameras. You got
Yeah,
cameras on their
everyone's
feet.
car,
You got
right?
cameras on every car's got
Yeah.
it. But to see him, and I think he even makes like a last lap pass to win or next
Oh
to last
man.
lap. It's very late in there. And so they had this incredible views. And so my first like racing memory, I think,
Yeah.
is that 83 Daytona 500. And it's because of that in-car camera. I thought was so
That's
cool.
impressive.
And Kale, is a Hall of Famer before my time. He's huge in the 70s, but he still drove the Hardee's car. And we had in my little town of Welcome, we had one restaurant back then, and it was Hardee's right down the road. And so we always thought that was the coolest thing, man. The Hardee's car won, and the Hardee's is right there. But I think that's my first memory of like a race.
Did you grow up with a favorite driver, or was it like you just enjoyed the sport of racing?
So to be fair, that's 9 years old. That's
Yeah.
probably when I started watching. And I think Richard Petty, everybody knew. So you
Yeah.
just gravitate towards Richard Petty.
Sure.
Didn't know any of the other drivers in '83 except for the Cale Yarborough, who happened to win this race with the
Yeah.
Hardy's car, and you knew Richard Petty because Richard Petty was from Randleman, which is another right around an hour away. He was just iconic. He
Yeah.
was bigger than the sport, and so that as a kid, everybody kind of rooted for Richard Petty.
For sure.
My middle start changing as I start getting more involved and you start finding other drivers. But yeah, that would have been who it was as a kid. I know your early favorite driver would have been a little different for Richard Petty had been retired for a long time when you probably
Little,
watched your first race.
little bit. It might, what they raced together though for quite some time.
Oh yeah.
Like late 70s to when did he officially retire?
He retires. His last race is in '92.
Okay. So yeah, I'm 4 at that point. So a
Yeah.
little younger, remember Richard Petty racing, but yeah, it's a little bit different. I'm brought into it. Father, is in the car business. So following cars has always been his thing, right?
Yeah.
Grows up, enjoying them, and a little bit different in the Philly area too. Like there's,
Sure.
you think about it, there are a lot of tracks kind of within a stone's throw from here. We've got being nestled just outside of Philly. There's Pocono.
Right.
Dover's just to the south, about an hour away.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple. Arca is a big, it's drag
Mm-hmm.
racing, but there's an Arca track, not too far from here. A little different, not NASCAR per se, but so it's
So
not.
NASCAR has bought the ARCA series, but it
Yeah,
was not at the time.
right.
So
So
yeah, it was its own thing. Yeah.
they it's just not it's not the South, right?
Right.
So it's a little bit different, but
Yeah.
still has a following of sorts and certainly a community, a rural. It's definitely a rural thing around here.
Sure.
Dover, there's not much else really around it other than a track, and it's probably one of the the wilder tracks to attend. It's similar to that like Bristol feel, right? Where it's like obviously
Yes.
Bristol's a half mile, Dover's a mile, monster mile, right?
Yeah.
But you still get that kind of short track environment, like stadium, coliseum almost esque environment
Absolutely.
of people packing that in and
Yeah.
watching just
I believe
constant action.
it's by far the fastest mile track
Oh, it's up there.
in sport.
Yeah,
It's because it is built like Bristol, like you're saying. It's a bowl. It's everything's
yeah.
banked, and you go
You
really really
leave it open,
fast.
leave it open.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they recently, well, at least within the last couple of years, I know they repaved it as well. So they used to have that
Good.
iconic like white concrete, and then they paved over it, make it a little bit faster.
Yeah, yeah, it got bought as well
Yeah,
by Speedway Motor Corp, who owns
yeah,
Bristol and Charlotte and a lot of these
yep.
other tracks. But yeah, they got bought there. I think it was a racetrack at one point in time, because when I was a kid, it was called Dover
Dover
Downs,
Downs, yep.
which is racetrack.
Yeah.
And I think they build casinos all around it now as
Oh yeah,
well. And
absolutely.
so yeah,
And I know I forget if it was always there, but they have this like really iconic bridge that goes over the track, and there's seats in the bridge, so you can
gotcha.
buy seats in the bridge over the top of the track and watch these cars like flying at 100 and whatever miles an hour
Yeah.
underneath you, which has to be just. I never got to go in it, but what an experience that must be.
Probably not anymore, seeing as insurance has taken away all that fun stuff. But yeah,
you know,
what an incredible idea.
right? Wild.
Yeah.
But it's so the earliest memory of being at a race, first race is Pocono. I
Okay.
get it as a Christmas gift. There's a couple trees. I wake up, Christmas morning, and there's, I'm waiting, opening gifts. Santa always brought one big gift, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I, get through all my stuff, unwrapping, and parents are like, "Well, there's one more." I'm like, "Well, where?" I don't say there's nothing else under the tree. Looking around and stocking. I used to get this bag. Like, well, we'll play a little hot and cold. So I started like going around the room looking for, how you're getting colder, a little far away. In the tree, nestled in the tree is a little envelope with like 2 tickets tucked in it for me and the pops to go up to Pocono, later that year and catch my first NASCAR race. So,
Wow.
wild experience.
So yeah, who won? Do you remember?
I'd have to go back and check. I do know that
Gotcha.
Earnhardt crashed,
Earnhardt
like in the
crashes.
final, few laps. I don't know if it was like engine problems or he
Sure.
hit the wall, but I was like 10 or 11 years
I was
old.
gonna say, okay, yeah, okay,
Um,
10.
you know,
It's
I
like perfect age for that, man.
Yeah, so it's great. And we
Hmm.
like not only being at the race, we had I'm not sure how we swung this either, but like we had, pit passes for ahead of the race to
Ooh,
be able to go down and like
yes.
see what goes on before a race on pit row and hear all the noises, watch them get ready, just be in the middle of all the action and then pop up into the grandstands on that stretch of track is like one of the coolest right
Oh,
by the start
it's
finish line
unreal.
especially, and
Yeah.
where they can just open it up and they're going 200
It's like
miles
a
an hour right
mile
by it.
long.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But probably, the tricky triangle is the nickname, right? A
Yeah.
weird one to watch because there's not really, they don't really surround it with seats. It's just that
Right. It's
front
only there on the
stretch.
front. Yeah.
So you got to kind of follow it. It's like a big swing of the neck as they go by, and then you watch them go around that tight turn one up into the
Yeah.
little pat. I forget what they used to call it, but the turn two
Tunnel
is
turn.
tunnel
It's where
turn.
the,
There we go.
yeah.
Yeah, and then around the big turn, the big swinging turn three before they come back down the stretch. So and it's like two and a
Yeah.
half miles, I want to
It's right
say.
at 2.5 miles.
So
Yeah.
it's just it is a oh, they get very far away.
I was going to
So
say, it is a
you're
massive
following these little
facility.
dots
Yes.
around the track from a distance, but no, what an experience. And then to go from that to we've been to Dover more times than I can count, over
Hmm.
the years, and that's an experience. And but something always been into, and from whether from a
That's
distance or watching
sure.
religiously. I think up until college, probably similar situation, right? It's
Yeah.
on it's on the home TV every Sunday,
Hmm.
alongside following football and
That's
whatnot.
right.
But
It's
it's
great
just like
napping,
you leave it
you
there. I know
know.
you leave it there. The green flag drops. Next thing you know, you wake up and there's 10
You
laps
always,
left.
Pocono as a first race is pretty awesome. Like I say, a little different than us because we had so many different tracks down here. But I have to tell you this story. My first ever Winston Cup experience. We'd obviously been to Bowman Gray, and we would occasionally go. It was called the Bush Series. Now
Yeah,
back
yeah.
then, it's the Xfinity. It's the
Xfinity, yeah,
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 it's the second tier
yep.
series, and so we would go to those. Those were on Saturday, and we would go to Rockingham and stuff like that. But my first ever Winston Cup event, I have to say, my mom worked for RJ Reynolds, which owned Winston,
Yeah.
and they were very heavily into racing. We talk Winston Cup is massive for NASCAR, but they also were in Formula One. They had Camel cars, actually sponsored Ayrton Senna's Camel car for a while. They were in IMSA, which is still around too, and that was the
Yep.
Camel GT and Camel Light series. And every every May they would have the Grand Prix of Charlotte, and it was at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and they would use the road course that they use for the Roval now,
Yeah.
and it was you know sponsored by Camel, and so all the RJR employees would get a ticket, and that was like a thing. Mom would round up a bunch of tickets, and myself, my cousins, my uncle, the whole family fair. We'd go watch the race and come back, have a picnic. We got back, it was a big deal, and they did that for many years, and in I think it's 87 they moved the All-Star race to Charlotte on that weekend. So they were not going to host this Grand Prix of Charlotte anymore. They were going to host the All-Star race, which they called the Winston. And on that weekend, and they did the same thing. All the employees, each employee got a free ticket to the Winston. And
Wow.
mom did the exact
Yeah.
same thing. She went, she got, hey, do you want to go to the race or whatever? And she ended up getting tickets from me, my family, brother, mom, dad, my uncle, cousins, all that good stuff. And so this was going to be my first ever NASCAR Winston
Wow.
Cup event, and so it's the 1987 Winston, and I I think the great ending of anything can change your perspective of the experience. I call it
Absolutely.
the usual suspects phenomenon. Do you know the movie The Usual Suspects?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think The Usual Suspects is a terrible movie with an amazing ending, and it fools you into thinking it's a good movie because the ending is so good. It even wins. It even
Yeah.
fooled the Oscars. It wins the Oscar for best screenplay that year.
Wow.
It beats out Braveheart. It beats out a
Wow.
small Pixar movie named Toy Story.
Jeez.
But for me, I rented the Usual Suspects. 15, 20 minutes in, I was asleep. I woke up, 10 minutes before the end. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I need to watch this again. And so I rewound it to start again, did the exact same thing. It's just not a very good movie. It's got a great ending. Usual suspects phenomenon is what I call it. And the 87 Winston has the usual suspects phenomenon because it's amazing to say that I was at this very famous event, but it really wasn't that great. We got there. It was mid-May in North Carolina. It was 82, but high humidity. It was hot.
Yeah.
Very, very hot. And so I'm sitting there in my seat. This is my first experience. I don't know if Pocono is like this. I don't know if this was an 80s thing or whatever, but we sit there. Uh, it is rowdy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And so you're all, you can bring your own foods. Everybody brings their chickens and their beers and whatever. And I was 13. I was getting ready. I would turn 14 the next month. So I was 13 years old. I sit down, and the first thing you notice is people would eat their chicken and chunk it towards the end. And so the walkway that was clean when I first started was now just covered in chicken bones and stuff. And it was like, what bizarro world have I walked into? Like I say, I'm 13. I'm sitting beside this guy who's, I don't know, he didn't look very old, but he's like, you need a couple of beers there, little guy? Dude, I probably shouldn't, I don't know who offers 13-year-olds beer, but I'd be kind of curious where that guy is today. But anyway, so that happens as well. The race finally starts, and it's like I say, it's very hot. And they're going to be 3 segments. It's going to be 75 laps, 50 laps, and then 10-lap shootout. Wow. So 75 and 50 is 125 laps before the 10-lap shootout. Bill Elliott led 121 of those laps. Wow. And the majority of them, he was way out in front. The only, was that 4? The only 4 he didn't lead, I think, were during pit stops.
Yeah.
So very hot. Not a Bill Elliott fan at the time. I love the guy. It's great for the sport, but
I got a story on him we'll have to get to.
Yeah. But to watch for in the searing heat, this guy just dominate, it was tough.
Yeah.
So we finally get to the 10 laps, and that's where the iconic moments happen. This 10-lap shootout. You go watch it on YouTube. It's iconic. Bill Elliott dominated. They're not going to let him dominate in this 10 laps. Earnhardt, Jeff Bodine, they start working on him. And, the next thing you know, it's a battle. And it's incredible. That 10 laps is amazing. And it even, Elliott tries to wreck him in the dog leg. Earnhardt goes through the grass, keeps the lead. It's called the pass in the grass. It's a very iconic NASCAR moment. That's my first Winston Cup event.
Incredible. That's incredible.
And so that's why I say it's very usual suspects, because even after the race, Earnhardt wins. I bought this iconic Dale Earnhardt t-shirt that I have in that picture there, and we then leave, and it took, I want to say, right at 2 hours to get out of this place. And we got home
no track has good parking situations to get out of. They're awful.
An hour away from here. And so when you tell people you were there for the pass in the grass, like, man, it's the most amazing thing ever. And you're like, not really.
It really wasn't.
But that's my first Winston Cup event.
That's awesome. That's incredible. So many ways I want to go with it, but I want to start with the guy you talked about because it actually relates to my first Winston Cup event.
Yeah.
That Pocono race, we made a weekend out of it, right? Pocono is not too far. Up in the mountains from Philly. But we take the opportunity to go weekend away, and guys, they're obviously there. They take their trailers there, the drivers. They make it home for the weekend because they're there probably from Wednesday, Thursday, because they've got practices.
Back then they would have been. Right? Yeah.
Practices, qualifying, and then the race. And so, they're at restaurants, their teams are out, whatever. I'm there, 8, 9, 10 years old. I run into Bill Elliott at a restaurant. He's sitting around a table with his team, eating a meal. I'm like a little kid, whatever. And I've got my program with me, like walking around, like program for this race. I approach, like little 9, 10-year-old. It takes a lot of, I've recognized the guy. He's very, recognizable individual. Go up to him to ask for an autograph, which I guess, everyone has their opinions on like how to handle those situations, right? Like, do you bother them when they're out? Like, but this is like a moment as like a 9, 10-year-old kid. I don't know. I'm not going to see Bill Elliott like this ever again. So
Right.
I'm going to go ask, so I do. And he shuns me off without an autograph. He's like, no, kid, sorry, get away from me. So from that moment on, he might be, I know he has a record run of like the most likable NASCAR
Yeah.
drivers year over year, something that like he hands over to Earnhardt and then Earnhardt wins and then
Right.
Earnhardt Jr. continues to
Junior
win.
then.
So
Yeah.
not in my book.
You weren't voting for him.
No, I was not. I was not a Bill
That's
Elliott fan
incredible.
to the point where I almost swore off McDonald's because I knew he was,
Because
big
that's
sponsor of his.
right. That's
But no, not
amazing.
anymore. I am a frequenter of McDonald's, but no, not of Bill Elliott. So
I will love. My mom was the biggest Bill Elliott fan, so now she's the biggest Chase Elliott fan. So we'll love for her to hear that story.
mean
And
to kids.
Bill, yeah, Bill being mean to a 9-year-old kid. That's incredible.
Oh, well,
So
you talk about so you got an iconic one. I want to throw one for my side, a little
yeah,
braggadocious moment, right? Another I'd have to check, I'm calling the Pocono race my first. I'd have to double check dates because they're close to one another.
sure.
Whether it was the same season or the season prior. I'm at the Coca-Cola 600, which I know is a big event in your area, Charlotte, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lowe's
That's it.
Motor Speedway at the time.
At the time.
1999 Coca-Cola 600, which has some significance for a couple of reasons. One, for me, I still have the shirt from that I wore to that race because
Yeah.
we were in turn between 3 and 4,
Mm-hmm.
probably closer to 4. Sitting like second row. It was far back. Like they don't like
Yeah.
the seats aren't really close to like the
Not
wall.
in
They
that
can't
corner.
be.
No. Yeah.
But we're like second row. I still there. I swear to this day, you could take that shirt out of the closet. It smells like the rubber coming off of the tires, and it
That's
just
right.
is the most glorious smell in the
Oh, it's
world. I
amazing.
had pellets all over me leaving that
You
race, and
covered in it.
it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So notable to me, but also notable to the NASCAR world because a certain individual who we just mentioned made his debut in NASCAR at that race. So Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s first race in NASCAR is
In the
that
cup.
Coca-Cola second, yeah, in the cup, right? Now, so he had been racing in the Busch Series and
Yes.
coming off a couple of consecutive championships, I believe.
Yes.
He races. That's his first Winston Cup race
Wow.
at that
So
track. So
so Junior's first Winston Cup race, the Coke 600, Little Rob
is
Stott
sitting in the
is in
stand
the house.
in the house,
That's
which
amazing.
it's a cool one. And then I go back and look at the results of that. I remember Jeff Burton dominating. I just didn't know by how much. So the Coca-Cola 600 around that's a 2 mile, mile and a half.
Mile and a half.
The
Yeah.
400 lap race, right? For a
Yep.
600.
Long.
Jeff Burton leads 198 laps of that race.
So almost half of it.
Dominates almost half the
Yeah.
race, does win the race. But, Earnhardt, top 6 finish. He finishes 6th.
Nice.
A good race for us, and just an awesome time too. Driving down to Charlotte and being there,
Yeah. So
being
to
able to be at
follow up
that.
on your
Yeah,
Dale Earnhardt Jr. story. So
yeah,
99,
yep,
600, Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s first lap. I think he races in 4 other events that year,
yep.
but he is racing full time in the, I
Following
don't
season,
know,
right?
is in
2000.
the, yeah, but in the
Yeah.
NASCAR, in the,
Oh,
I
Bush.
guess it
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
Busch series at the
Yep,
time. He had won the Busch championship in 98. So 99 was going to be his last year,
yep,
and he ends up winning his second Busch championship in November
yep.
of 99. That same year you had saw him. Well, I get married on December the 4th of 1999. We leave for our honeymoon on December the 5th, 1999. So as we were going to Jamaica, going to Ocho Rios, and our
Mm.
flight connected into Atlanta. So we left Charlotte pretty early. So we actually got a room. Our honeymoon started in Charlotte. So we got a room in Charlotte and got up 6 o'clock, 5:30, whatever it was, to go catch our flight. And so we get in line. Charlotte at that time was almost exclusively U.S. Airways. There was a small counter for Delta, which is what we were going Delta to Atlanta, and then
Yep.
Air Jamaica down. So there wasn't many people down at the gate there at Delta. So we're just standing in line. And who is in front of me but Mr. Dale Earnhardt Jr.?
Yeah.
Now, this is not Dale Earnhardt Jr. 2023. This is
Right.
Dale
This is
Earnhardt
like
Jr.
bleached. This is like
1999.
bleached frosted tips,
He's
looking like Justin
young.
Timberlake. The
And
curly blonde hair.
and he hasn't been in the Cup Series, so he's not. I mean, he's got the name, but he's
Yeah.
not Dale Earnhardt Jr. that you know now.
No.
And to the point where I look over at my wife and I'm like, I think that's Dale Earnhardt Jr. And of course, my wife's like,
No way.
Dale Earnhardt Jr. is not standing. I was like, it's not Dale Earnhardt, it's his
Right.
son, Dale
Right.
Earnhardt Jr. And she's like, would he really be standing with the commoners here? And it's like, yes, he would. He's. So anyway, we go through the line, we work our way up, and he's checking in beside us. Where I'm at this counter and he's at this one. I'm kind of looking over at his passport. We had to show our
Check a
passports. I'm
name.
checking names. It's like, so he finishes up right before I do, and he walks off. And the woman goes, "Hey, do you know who that was?" And I turned to my wife. I'm like, "I told you it was Dale Earnhardt Jr." So Dale Earnhardt Jr. is on my honeymoon flight whole way. Him and
That's
his
awesome.
a local radio station had a flyaway with Dale Earnhardt Jr. event in Jamaica on that week. So all these folks had paid to go hang out with Dale Earnhardt Jr. from this radio are on our flight going down to
That's
Jamaica. So
incredible.
yeah, I've never actually met the guy.
Oh,
His sister went to UNCW where I went for a short amount of time. Never met her, but I know she was there.
yeah. She a
But that's
racer
the
as well, right? Yeah.
she
Carrie,
was.
or right?
Yeah. Well, Carrie's
Carrie's
his
another
older
brother.
brother.
That's right. And
Yeah.
there, man, I'm blanking on the name. There's like four Earnhardt kids. Terry.
uh,
Terry is a wife.
yeah, Kelly is her
Kelly. There
name.
we go.
Yeah, but that's my Dale Earnhardt Jr. story. It's the
That's
closest I
awesome.
was ever to him was
Wow.
checking into my flight on my honeymoon, and that's that same year you
That's
got to see
nuts.
him. But that's right before he becomes who he is, because once I mean, he's got the name. Granted,
Yeah.
absolutely, but that 2,000 years when he becomes who he's going to become, because he starts getting more and more famous, and Budweiser gets
Cool.
behind him, and he does all this. So he's not that guy at that point in time. So it's
Yeah.
pretty wild to see. And he had, like I say, he had this flyaway with his friends, and he brought his friends with him. So that's who was with him. It's like, hey, he brought his crew, and it's like, hey, we're gonna go down to Jamaica on this radio event. I'm gonna bring all my guys. So,
That's
but
incredible.
that's my Dale Earnhardt Jr. story,
That's
man.
incredible. And I don't want to jump ahead too far because we want to talk about some memorabilia and we'll get back
Yeah,
to it. But be talking about Junior, I feel like it's a perfect segment to mention this. So I have the ticket stub from that race, the
yeah,
Coca-Cola 600. There's a AC Delco was his sponsor. So from the Busch series, so
yes,
a car battery company. Um, there's a couple local shops around our area here, where he would do signing events at AC Delco's. So,
yes.
I go to one and I have a picture, the picture they were giving out there with like the
Hmm.
AC Delco car,
Yep.
and then a picture of his face and like 98, Bush championship, like just a frame picture, whatever. I
Yeah.
get that signed. I bring the ticket stub as well from the race. So I have his debut race ticket stub signed by
Yeah.
him. Not too far after that. So that's my closest. I got to actually talk to him.
Look
I had
at
the
you
guts
go.
to say something like, "Hey, you're Dale Jr." Instead of just
That's
standing at a ticket counter and like not actually saying
that's
anything.
right. That's right.
No, so
Hey, well,
that's yeah.
let's continue down this Earnhardt because I've got another
Yeah.
pretty neat story. Being where I was, I did get to go to Talladega in '87, but '88 I came back, and we Martinsville technically is the closest. It's
Yeah.
right at under an hour to me. Back then, Martinsville would sell out. It didn't have a ton of seats. I think it seated about 40,000 people, but he would hold I think his name is H.J. Earls, as he owned the track, and he would hold like 5,000 seats for Sunday morning, and it was only $20, and you could sit on the back
Wow.
stretch. And so we did that for several years, where we just got up on Sunday morning, drove up to Martinsville, and got these backstretch seats. Same deal, like you're talking about. You're covered
Yeah.
in tire dust and rubber, and it's incredible. But that day, it was sponsored. Haynes was huge in our area, and apparently one of their products was Pan Neal. I don't even know what this is, but it was the Pan Neal sweatshirts 500 in Martinsville. So
Oh,
this is
some of the names of
April. Oh my
races. They're
gosh, it's
unbelievable.
unreal. So Earnhardt wins that day. He actually dominates, and I think he leads like the last 200 laps. But
Wow.
finishing second would be the guy who would become I was an Earnhardt guy, but my
Yeah.
second favorite driver was always Sterling Marlin. And
Oh,
Sterling Marlin was unknown at the time, and he was driving. I I can't remember the team, but he drove for Piedmont, and
Okay.
Piedmont was an airline that was based in
Yeah.
Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
If you travel,
Well, it's Piedmont Airport, right? Is that still called
well,
that?
PTI is the
Yeah.
airport in Greensboro, but
Okay.
Piedmont Airlines was in Winston.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Smith Reynolds was our airport at the time, and but yeah, Piedmont was a big name in our area,
Yeah.
and so he drove the Piedmont car. I thought it was so cool. You know, it's a Winston Salem
Wow.
company, so I became a Sterling fan, and he finished second that day. So that I think that was April
Yeah.
in '98. So May of '98, 1 month later, I was a I think freshman in high school, and we had a few electives. Your freshman year, you kind of pretty much so you're going to take English, you're going to take math, you're going to
Yeah.
take history, but you had one or two electives, and one of those electives was agriculture. Now, if you think about who you're talking to,
Right.
I couldn't grow anything. I don't know anything. I
Well, you
shop
needed
I'm
the class,
okay in. I can
It's
turn,
like
yeah, exactly. I can turn, I can fix little things. I'm okay with that. But one of the reasons we took agriculture class was in the fall, you got to go to the state fair. So you got out of school for a day. So I was
yeah,
like, that's
there you go.
cool.
Okay.
And then on the backside, in the second half, you built these CO2 cars, which were similar to Cub Scouts. I was in Cub Scouts, and we would make,
Okay.
Pinewood Derby cars.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same thing, but it had a CO2 cartridge in it, and it would fire the pin, and you would
Oh,
race down a
yeah.
line. It was awesome.
Oh,
So I was
man.
like, wanted to do this.
Heck yeah.
Well, come to find out, in agriculture class, our agriculture teacher had an inn down the street, 1 mile to Richard Childress Racing. And if you made all A's for the year, he took a group down there. I
Oh,
didn't know nothing about agriculture, so I did not make all A's all year.
no.
But he knew how big a fan I was, and so he came up to me
Talked your way
quietly and
in.
he's like, "They're going to let you go."
Oh,
So on
man.
a on an afternoon in May of 1998, we got on a school bus and rode down the mile and a half into Richard Childress Racing for a behind the scenes tour with just us.
That's incredible.
And they had one of the guys. My father was he was a shop guy. He did linens and shop uniforms, and Richard Childress Racing was on his route. So I knew the Will Lenz and the Chocolate Myers and the Kurt Shelberdys. I knew these guys. I knew what they looked like just
Yeah.
from my dad talking about. I didn't know this guy who was giving us the tour, so it was it's like, okay, no biggie. So we walk in. We walk down, and sure enough, the office to the left is RC's, and he's on the phone. He obviously didn't come out and say, "Hey, kids, how are you doing?" He just stayed on the phone. But there's Richard Childress talking on the phone, so it was kind of cool. So when you walked into the main room, it had like 8 cars, and most of them were needing to be tore down. So they had just come from Talladega, so the Talladega car was sitting there, and it was beaten with rocks and stuff because it's Talladega.
Yep.
But the Martinsville car was sitting there too. They had not tore it down yet. And he's like, "Yeah, and this is the car we want at Martinsville." And I'm like, "Hey, I was
I was
there." He's
there.
like, "Oh, you were there." Yeah. And it was so cool, just to be around these cars. Well,
Man.
sure enough, the eighth car was covered in a tarp. Well,
Yeah.
me being
What's
the
up with
curious
that? Yeah,
person,
right.
I
Yeah.
was like, "Hey, what's
Got one.
underneath the tarp?" And he got all nervous and sweaty. And he was like, "Oh, that's a prototype, son. We can't talk about that one." So 88 is the last year they run a Monte Carlo. In 90, they went,
Which.
in 89,
Yep.
they go to Lumina, I think it
Yeah.
is.
Yep.
And that was the year they had already built their Lumina ready to roll for
Wow.
templates and stuff like that. It was just covered. So,
That's
um,
crazy.
yeah, but
That's
that
incredible.
is,
Like, what an
yeah,
experience too, to see that, like the shop up close like that and just
yeah.
walk through,
They would,
watch them working.
oh, because that's the thing. They would have these fan days. They still do. They had fan day
Yeah.
this year, and it comes in, and it's a very, I don't want to say touristy event, but it's built for the fans. It's built
Yeah.
to host a bunch of fans. This was 15 guys from an agriculture class at the high school. This
Like,
was a
you got it to
normal
yourself.
work day. They're
Yeah.
just in there working.
Doing the thing. Oh, man.
Yes. And so it was incredible. And Mr. Hill, I can't thank you enough for, even though I didn't make
Shout
A's
out.
all year, giving me a shout out to Mr. Hill, ninth grade
Understanding
agriculture teacher.
what that
You
would mean
know,
to Doug
oh,
Marsh.
it's
Oh, that's
exactly.
awesome.
He had no idea because, he's like, to be fair, you didn't make all A's, but I could tell you were trying. I was like, yeah, I just don't know nothing about agriculture, man. But yeah, that was pretty much so one of those highlights of life, as a
Man.
kid, 14, 15 years old. That is it. That's these types of things that just man, you're like,
They
you don't
stand
realize
out.
how lucky you are. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, Earnhardt's not there. He lived down in Kannapolis.
Yep.
So there's no Earnhardt sighting, but it was still amazing to see.
His cars.
Yeah,
Like,
88,
oh
I think, is the first year he's in black. So these were all the black Jim Goodwrench cars.
man.
The 87 win that I see at the Winston, he's in the Wrangler car.
Yep.
But these, by this point in
Blue and
time,
yellow.
he had
Well,
switched
you know
it
what's
over.
funny? Now that I think about it, the connection to that, that's basically, I had that jersey on. If you go back and watch the Eagles episode, or the
Yeah,
Eagles episode, the football episode with
the football episode.
the city edition jersey of that blue and yellow. That's basically I could just call that my
It is.
Earnhardt jersey. It's
It's
like
your Earnhardt Wrangler
my
jersey.
Wrangler
So,
jersey. No, same
but
colors.
once again, you take for granted. I just happen to live here,
Yeah,
but all
man.
these guys
Now
living in this area.
have you ever had the opportunity? You mentioned Kannapolis. Ever get down
Mhm.
there to see the DEI and everything like
I
that?
never did. Never got to see those. Once again, when you go down the road now, when you go
Yeah,
through, they all have advertisements on signs to say, "Hey, you can come visit," because they all have shops,
yeah.
stores, that sort of stuff.
We'll have to make that
Uh,
one
yeah,
of these times down there. A little side trip to Kannapolis would
I
be
guess
well worth it.
it would be, but it will never be
That I
15
know you can't
students
like
in
just
a
oh
working day.
no.
RC on the phone, in my head, he's talking to Earnhardt about the setup for next week. We're gonna get the setup right. You
Incredible.
just won last week. We want it more. So that's what he's talking in my head. And he's technically talking to some supplier who didn't get him his parts in time, and he's giving it to him. But you
Man.
know, but it's an incredible experience that you take for granted when you're in those.
Did he have the old Winston cups? Were they there? Because I imagine. Well, you said eight. What year was it that you were there? 89, 88,
80,
89,
88.
88.
Yeah,
So,
they had
well,
one.
Earnhardt would have had one, at least one by then, two, maybe.
Yeah, I think they had won 86. I think 88 that year Elliott wins. So I
Yep.
think he won 87 as well. So there would have been two. Earnhardt wins one in 80, but not with
Yeah.
Childress.
Right.
So Earnhardt had three at the time, but
Yep.
only two for Childress. But it's funny to think of. I don't remember a trophy case.
To
I don't
seeing them.
remember
Yeah.
going in and being like,
Interesting.
hey, here's our Super Bowl trophies. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
It probably was there. I was more in awe of that room with
Cars.
all those cars.
Yeah. Oh man.
Just to think, because
You
in
get to
your
see them
head,
like were they up in the air,
they
underbelly,
are
like
on
seeing
the
guts of
ground,
the
just
oh
sitting there.
man.
They each had their own parking place, and this floor. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
machine shop. This is a car
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Oil, grime,
Oh,
dirt, and it was perfect in there. And in your head as a kid, there's only one car. They bring the same car every week, right?
right. Oh no.
No, there was eight of them. It was like, oh my gosh, there's just Jim Goodrich, Jim Goodrich, Jim Goodrich, number three, number three, number three. All lined up. So it was an amazing experience.
Man, that's
To
awesome.
yeah,
What a just an iconic car too at this point, right? Like you
so
just think
iconic.
about
Still, when you see the three, you're like, oh yeah, that's awesome. It's Earnhardt. It's funny as we transition into those that I mentioned the
yeah.
Lumina, when they transitioned in, there's another event that I think, you know, takes NASCAR to another place. And it's in the summer of 1990. And it's when Days of Thunder comes out. And,
Yeah.
we're
Yep.
talking, NASCAR, real
Mhm.
sport, all that good stuff. But a lot of people's first introduction to
To the
NASCAR
sport.
is
Yep.
is Days of Thunder. And
It,
when the first time I'm gonna be honest, the first time I saw it, I wasn't that crazy about it because it is a caricature of the sport.
oh, absolutely.
There's
Yep.
all this, the racing scenes aren't very realistic, they're
You mean
banging
they
and
don't just like
beating.
weave through
Yeah.
clouds of smoke and avoid
Let's just
cars or run
automatically, the job here is to put him in the wall, I'm
right?
gonna put him in the wall. But once you get
Yeah.
past that this is a character, but it's fun and
Yeah.
we love the characters and stuff like that. And you're like, okay, I'm okay with this.
Yeah.
But I can remember walking out as a kid, as a purist, being, well, that was
What the
terrible.
hell?
Yeah.
What did
How
I
dare
just
they make
watch?
fun of our sport like
Right.
that? But as I got further away from it and actually went back and saw it again in the theater, it became this, It's
It's
terrible but beautiful in the same sense. It's so cheesy, but
it
my
is.
goodness, it's amazing.
So our experiences with it are obviously different, right? Different
Yeah,
eras. So you get to see
sure.
it in a theater. I don't
I
see it until
did.
it's out on VHS.
Nice.
so,
Yeah.
so my experience is watching it and being able to rewind it immediately and experience it like 6 times a day.
Nice.
I'm into the sport, but I don't think I truly love it until that as a
Hmm.
kid and seeing it kind of characterized, right?
You're right.
Watching these Tom Cruise, who's probably more known at the time for Top Gun than he is Days of Thunder, but
Yeah.
knowing that he took the time to do a NASCAR movie, me as a kid, I'm like, I'm not thinking of it from that regard, but just the fact that I can go rewind a movie and watch these just so dramatic scenes and to the point where I was able I could probably write the script from memory of that movie, just how it went down and some very flashy music and scenes and just things that you remember and uh villains that you come to hate
Oh,
but without realizing at the time, because I am just a kid until you go back and watch it nowadays, like who they were trying to portray.
right.
But like that really cements it, I think, for me early in life, just the importance of NASCAR to me and
Yeah,
watching it be something that can be done in sort of the Hollywood setting, right?
absolutely. And I will say, like, hey, it could have been a movie and just went away, but there were certain things about it that made it
Oh.
stay. And we've talked about this in other episodes. I'm a video game guy, and so there was a Days of Thunder video game that I had for the NES that was amazing. But one of the coolest things is in south of Charlotte, just on the border of North and South Carolina, is our amusement park, which is Carowinds. And Carowinds is in the heart of NASCAR country,
Yeah.
and what they were able to do was build a simulator.
Man.
And the
Oh,
first simulation that they had in there was the Days
Days
of
of
Thunder
Thunder. Was it one of
simulation.
those? Now, was it one of those boxes that you sat in and it was like the 4D thing that moves
It
around? Like, is
was,
that?
but it was the full theater, and
Yeah,
each
yeah,
you had the full theater, and your seat moved, and you locked in, and it moved,
yeah,
and you were racing, and you were and you were Cole, and you're racing
yeah.
there with Rowdy and Russ and all these things, and
I
then you get into the Dave,
feeling.
you get to a pit stop, and
Yeah.
it jacks you up, and then zah, zah, zah,
Yeah.
and it was incredible, and then
Yeah.
you win the race, and they're shaking the car, and so it lived on by stuff like that. I think that opens
Yeah.
in 93. So the movie's in 90. 3 years later, we get this amazing simulator
S-
that's based on Days of Thunder as well, which brings it back.
Yeah.
You know?
Amazingly, so there's a Philadelphia auto show every year. Car show comes to town and obviously it's for the big manufacturers, the Fords, the Chevy,
Sure.
they bring but there's a lot of appearances and other experiences that, again, dad being in the car business, this is something that he was expected to be at. So we would get tickets and like my mom, I remember my mom and him going to the black tie event for the opening night of it. They
Yeah.
would go to that regularly, but then we would go. Um, so and when I say appearances, like I remember they would have like to throw back like some WWE guys would show up occasionally.
Oh,
They'd have
yeah.
local athletes. I met oh man, I'd have to go back and look at some of the names but like Valvoline. I remember the Valvoline, not Mark Martin, but whoever drove it after that. It was the number 10 car at the time.
Johnny Benson.
Benson. So I have a Benson autograph from
Mm-hmm.
him, being at the auto show. But I remember one of the experiences is it was not a full theater, but it was like a box that it would seat about 10 to 15
Okay.
people inside of it, that it was the same thing where it was like you would climb in,
Ah,
wait to get into the box, and it
yeah.
would be the Days of Thunder experience at the auto show where it was like doing that with the car. So
Yes.
we did the same thing, man.
There you
So
go.
it's
So
it's an
cool.
incredible experience and just
It,
like it
it,
puts you in the movie.
it
Yeah.
absolutely puts you in the movie. But once again, I'm heavily on the 80s, but the 90s are a huge time for NASCAR. And I got to be honest, I think Days of Thunder had a huge impact on it going forward.
Yeah.
Granted, you ask about Richard Petty, and there's a
Scene with him, right?
it,
Isn't that
well, I was going to say
ish?
in 92, you have
Yeah.
this magic day in Atlanta. So Atlanta is the last race of the year. There are, I believe, five drivers who could win the championship that day. It's where they got the idea for the chase for the championship, where
Yeah.
multiple people could win. So you have five people who could win the championship in the last race. You have Richard Petty's last race. He's retiring Atlanta 92. You also have an upstart kid who is his first race. It's Jeff Gordon.
Yeah.
You have this magic day in Atlanta. And
Like a
when
changing of the guard.
it was a complete changing of the guard. And what's amazing is with all these five guys, I think Bill Elliott was one, I think Davey Allison was one, but Alan Kowicki was the other. And he ends up winning that day. He finishes second. He doesn't win the race, but he wins the championship. And, so you had Richard Petty return, you had Jeff Gordon coming in, and you had a guy who was an independent. He's the last independent to win the championship, and then he passes away in an airplane crash not 6 months later. It's unreal. So over the course, you had this really wild time. Once again, you get Days of Thunder. You get all these things going on. You get this new Jeff Gordon guy. You get Earnhardt is still huge, and he's actually become more popular because in the 80s, he is a villain because he is very rough and stuff like that. We talk about Days of Thunder, and Rowdy is really based on Earnhardt, and
Rubbin's
so you
racing,
got,
damn it.
yeah, exactly. So the 90s, you have this wild time where it just takes off, and my guy, Lovin Sterling Marlin wins back-to-back Daytona 500s, 94, 95. And it's an amazing time in that era. I am in college, and so I started to wane a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man, you ducked out at the wrong time.
I ducked out at the wrong time. So we go through the 90s. I know who Dale Earnhardt Jr. is, obviously, because he's standing beside me when he's checking in. But as we come into the 2000s, it is prime to just go. You got Junior coming in. Earnhardt, it turned 50, I think, in 2000. So I am 50 years old now as well. I'm the same age as he was in 2000. He was still winning races.
Yeah.
We don't have anybody like that anymore. Kevin Harvick just retired. I think he was maybe 46 or 47.
Jimmy might be or might have been the last connection to
but
someone
he's still
young.
Yeah, still younger.
But
Earnhardt was 50 years old, still winning races. That just isn't happening anymore. So as we start into 2000, I think they're prime. They signed a deal with Fox that's huge for 2001. They had been on ESPN and CBS. They had been on, but Fox was going to cover the entire first half of the season every week on Big Fox. It was a huge thing. And then February of 2001 happens.
Yeah. Well, the wild thing, you're not to blitz through the 90s, but there's an iconic memory for me, having been, that I'm still an Earnhardt fan.
That's right.
It's
that's right. No,
98 is an iconic year under
true.
Unique
You're
circumstances.
Right.
He doesn't get the speed across the line. He wins under caution, but he wins that Daytona 500. And
he does.
You talk about iconic moments in the sport, and the only thing I'm sad about with that moment is that it was in a black car, but it had that giant plus across the front, which was like a very weird design for him. It didn't have the GM Goodwrench. It was still a GM Goodwrench car, but whatever. I couldn't even tell you why they did that. I was too young to probably understand and know what was going on.
So it was their service plus.
Okay.
So it was for them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was them, but it was something that they were
of all
promoting.
The years to do it, they do it the year he wins the Daytona 500. But then just him coming down pit road, and literally it's the one race he could not win. He had 7 championships, all these wins, never a 500. But to finally
he won the Daytona 499 once. I think he won the Daytona 497 and a half 2 other times.
Right.
But
never the 500.
Never the 500.
And it he would, they would do the Gatorade shootouts. He would have wins that weekend during Daytona week.
He would win the 400 in July.
Pepsi, so plenty of wins at the track, but never the 500. And
never the 500.
Finally do it in 98, it was like the last, if there was any, a bucket list of NASCAR, it was the last thing he needed to check off, and he did it.
It's by far the highlight of the 90s. You're right. And once again, being, right at that peak, video game guy, EA had just, had started a campaign with cyber so-and-so. And if in football, hey, this is, Cyber Peyton, or this is
Yeah.
Cyber whoever, and it's like, hey, this is Cyber Dell.
Yeah.
And they turned the iconic 3 burnout that he did in the grass into a digital format. And it was such a cool ad,
Oh,
hey, this is Cyber Dale. And it was
yeah.
like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But yeah, I absolutely, in the height of this huge 90s growth, that is the most
Yeah.
iconic moment in the sport.
I
I'm
mean,
going to
just him
say
doing the high
positive
fives.
iconic
Yeah.
moment in the
High
sport.
fives down pit lane all the way. That is no one. I don't
No,
think that no one would, garner that kind of reception, today for just like how much he gave to the sport,
sure.
to, finally like just get that monkey off his back.
Yeah. And
Um,
he would turn 48 that year.
yeah.
So once again, nobody in the sport is even 48. And he won a Daytona 500 at
At 48.
48.
So,
No.
um,
But yeah, you're right. That is huge, especially in our lifetime. As far as positive moments go, that's by far the biggest positive moment. I think we'll have a couple that are close in the
yeah, there's interesting
2000s,
ones. Yeah.
but the biggest negative,
It turns quick.
obviously,
Yeah, it
yeah,
turns quick.
yeah,
So it's
he
crazy to think that just 3 years later at the same track,
same track.
just what can
The
happen after
yes,
the curtain it draws. It's like, you talk about 92 being a moment where Gordon comes in and
yeah,
it was like that changing of the guard. It felt like there was a very forced one. Almost
definitely.
immediately in the early 2000s.
And like I
So,
say, they had just signed a big deal with Fox. That's Fox's first race,
mm,
and it's a magical race.
yeah.
So much cool stuff. Once again, Junior had run his rookie year in 2000. I think he had won a couple of races. I think he actually gets beat for rookie of the year by Matt Kenseth, possibly.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But he's still, and he comes back
Climbing
in
the ranks
2001
quickly.
ready to roll. And they all, it's an amazing day for all of them.
Hey, the one two, Walter Bernhardt, 1-2, or Walter
Yeah.
Jr., the
Yeah.
DEI
Yeah.
cars finishing up front, and
Yeah.
what happens, there's a lot of, possible explanations, but like it's
Sure.
clear those final laps he's there blocking.
Blocking like
He's
crazy.
doing it
It's,
to make sure that those two go and have their moment,
it
and battle
is
it out. But
hard to watch, but
yeah,
man, it's amazing to watch as well because it is incredible. You know, there Earnhardt, quintessential the speedway guy, but my man Sterling Marlin was pretty amazing on him too, and he is right behind him. In
for better or
a
worse,
yeah, exactly.
right?
For both of them, in this beautiful Coors Light silver Bullet can car. I mean, it's all silver. It's
Yep.
beautiful, and yeah, and they all come into that final turn, and NASCAR changes, and
Yeah.
I hate to say it's never been the same
Yeah, no,
after that
it's
turn.
it hasn't, because you like there's a lot of what ifs that come out of that. Like what would the
Absolutely.
sport be? It's absolutely would still be around. We still got
Oh yeah, sure.
Petty and like probably up in the commentary booth talking. Yeah, I could see him and his kid doing it together to an extent, right? Like being there
Yeah,
talking. Earnhardt, we might Junior might still be racing. If not
conceivably.
for like, because I know you mentioned the age thing, right? And I
Yeah,
think that has a lot to do with a lot of these guys thinking, like, man, well, I don't want to go much longer because I'm right around that age where that happens.
right.
Like, I know he talked about it a lot too, Junior. Coming up on his own retirement, because he's someone that could absolutely still go, but it was like he got to the age where, hey, this is when I lost my dad.
That's right.
It's like a lot of those
Yeah.
mental things come back into play, and
Yeah, I
so
think he
it
turned
still impacts.
49 this year.
Mhm.
So he is, and he's been now retired 4 years or whatever,
Yeah, it's like he
five
didn't want to
years.
get to that
So
age.
he didn't, just didn't want to do it. And so, but yeah, the loss of Earnhardt is just massive on the
It's
sport. And I really, like it's hard to even describe it in comparison to the other sports that we've talked about,
I know
baseballs and
there's
footballs, and there's really nothing like it where
no
hey, by the way, the sport's most iconic person, even if
like
they were to
there
pass in a plane crash or
right.
something like that.
There's been moments. Well, the other thing too, like there's been moments of someone being forced to retire
Right,
or something like that. Vince Young might be he wasn't like, but not someone at the height of their sport.
right.
Um,
And even then, I'm a baseball guy. You have a couple that stand out. Roberto Clemente had
I'm
He
sorry.
passed away
Yeah, yeah.
in a plane crash. But even he was up there in, he had just had his 3,000 hit. He had been a long time
Right.
player,
I say
you know.
young. I meant Steve McNair. The Titans
He-
thing got me right.
yeah,
But
that's
like
yeah,
yeah,
fair.
Steve McNair losing his
Hmm.
life.
Yeah,
But not in the middle of their sport. Like
right.
not
It didn't
on the
happen
field of
in the
play.
game.
Not
Yeah,
in doing what he was doing. What
yeah,
he had done for years. So
yeah.
it's just it's also one of those things. Do you remember where you were?
So I do. I watched it.
Mhm.
On This was 2001. I was 27. I got married as obviously 99 on the flight, Dale Earnhardt
Yep.
Jr. And on Sundays, Sunday evenings, we played basketball, pickup basketball at the old gym that I used to play, like pee
Yep.
wee basketball in. And we watched the race. Didn't know, went to play basketball
Yeah.
with my buddies, and we had cell phones, but I don't. It just wasn't as big a deal. And I remember my buddy's wife showing up at the gym. It was kind of like, well, why are you here?
Yeah.
She had never done this before, and
This
she
is
came in to
nuts.
tell
Yeah.
us that he had passed. So
Yeah.
I was playing pickup basketball with some buddies at the
Yeah.
gym that I used to play pee wee basketball in when she told
Wild.
us.
Um, not old enough to go anywhere like that, but I remember getting a phone call from
Hmm.
an aunt, and saying it, saying the words like did you
Yeah,
hear? I was like, what? Like, there's no. It's like one of those unbelievable things. Like it's you're in reality is suspended for a moment. Like that's
it
not
is.
possible. Like
Yeah,
not even just
this
I don't want to get into the wreck itself and whatever, but
sure.
like because it didn't look bad. Like it
It
didn't look
really
like a
it
wreck
really
that could do
doesn't.
that. Um, and so you're not thinking about it. So then to just be like blindsided by it, and when
Hmm.
I say blindsided, it's like, well, this is it's a guy that raced, like it's a NASCAR driver. Like, how's it impact? Uh, you walk into my room when I was a child. I had wallpaper going around the top, like banner wallpaper around the top of my room that would,
Yeah,
the markings of it are still in there, I think, unless, someone's painted over it. But it was Dale Earnhardt wallpaper. I had Dale
yeah,
Earnhardt sheets,
yeah,
I had Dale Earnhardt wall thing. Like I have a room now in the house that I'm in now. The table where our TV sits, we had it done since it's like the man cave room. We
yeah.
had it done in black and white tiles, like to replicate a checkered flag. Um,
Wow.
More Dale Earnhardt like mini, scale model cars that are in
Cars.
like a suite that
Yeah.
I have on my wall. Um, there's just so much NASCAR, in
Man.
kind of what you were as a young person to like, that's so many T-shirts that I would like wear. There's pictures of me, in like middle school yearbooks with like Dale Earnhardt T-shirts.
Right.
So the guy meant a lot.
He
And they'll
he
watch it
did
just like be taken away like that. Uh,
immediately.
at what felt like for me, obviously it wasn't. I'm sure tail end of his career at the time, but like to me, it felt like he was in his prime. could
Yeah.
have could have kept going for years.
Yeah.
And then just all of a
And
sudden he wasn't.
hate to even go that route, but gosh, what would have happened? He probably had a year or two left just because, he
He finished
probably
like
wanted
top
to.
3 in points, like not
He
long prior. I think
he
the
did.
previous year,
He
like there was
did.
he could have won an eighth championship.
I think if you can go back, Talladega 2000 is his
He
last
wins,
win.
yeah.
And I think he is 15th and they come to two to go. It is amazing. Once again, go watch it on
Oh,
YouTube. It is incredible. He
nothing
comes
like it.
from nowhere to
Absolutely
win this
nowhere to winning
thing.
that race.
And it became much more significant, on what is the
Hmm.
date? The date on your
Yeah,
shirt there,
right.
February
If
the
you're watching the video version of this is a T-shirt from that Daytona, February 18th,
February
2001.
18th. Yeah.
A shirt that someone, a friend of the family happens to be there that day and brings a T-shirt back that I don't think I've put on a single time since then because it's like one of those things. It's just like I'd rather throw it in a closet and like
Yeah.
forget about the day.
Yeah.
But it's just wild to think like that is a day for so many reasons that the sport changes.
Absolutely does. And
You know,
one of the wild things is it takes a little while because they were huge at the time and they were continuing to grow. And
mhm,
the 2000s to 2010 is a massive time for NASCAR. There's tons of money and they're huge sponsors.
mm,
And then it just
boom.
goes away.
Yeah,
And they turn around and like, where's everybody at? What where
they're grieving.
who's this
They're
random
grieving. Yeah,
sponsor on my car because I
yeah,
can't get massive companies to pay for this
yeah.
anymore. And the 2000 aughts, whatever, the teens are completely different. And as they say, I would watch one race a year. I still watch the Daytona 500, but that was it.
Yeah.
I can tell you, you asked who the Valvoline 10 car was from the 90s. It was like, oh, it's Johnny
Rattle
Benson.
it off like
I,
that,
I,
right?
I,
Yeah.
I can tell you that stuff instantly. I had no
Today,
idea.
well,
No
today might
idea.
be different for you,
Today's
but
a
yeah,
little
those,
bit
yeah,
different, but if you go through who won the championship in 2012, I have no idea. I know Jimmy Johnson wins a bunch of them in a row.
yeah,
I think he wins 7 championships as well, but I
yeah. He's
believe
up
he
there.
wins like 5 in a row or
Yep.
something like that. I know that, but I don't know what years they are. I have no connection to the sport like I did when I was,
Yeah.
in the 80s and the 90s. And,
Well,
you know,
the other impacts of it too, like obviously there's the just the amount of people that kind of I don't want to maybe they lose interest, maybe it's like a grieving thing, but that just like kind of go away because of it.
yeah,
Um, but then also the sport itself, and there's probably a separate conversation around that word that we could have on NASCAR being a sport.
yeah,
Because I'm purposely calling it that, throughout
yeah,
this to make a point, but maybe we can circle back to that. But the sport itself changes because you see so many immediate rule implementations.
yeah.
There's the Hans device, the hand and neck system, like
Hmm.
restraint system because of, the accident and what it was perceived to have done,
Yeah.
to keep people's heads still. And then also
He
those softer, yeah, the masks, right?
he was
He was an
him.
iconic,
Yeah.
images of him always. He was like the last to have the
Him and his son
full
were the
face
only
shield, right?
two that did not have the full face on that day.
Immediately having to go, to the full
Hmm.
masks and the
Hmm.
visors that flip up. The tracks themselves, all started to install those softer barriers for
Yep.
crashes that, they were going into concrete walls,
They were.
which is insane to think about.
Yeah.
But to today, well, obviously today, but immediately in the aftermath of that, you see these softer barriers. It sounds like
Hmm.
you're not running into pillows by any means, but there's these walls that have a little
The
bit of
give.
cushion in between them
Yeah.
and the give. So
Yeah.
it similar to like it's to me it's like changing up the helmet technology in
You're
football
right.
to soften the blow of a crash for concussions. It's still
Yeah.
gonna hurt, right? But
Yeah, when they get into their cars now, you can look at them as like a fighter jet. You're fully enclosed here. You can't turn your head. Look at those guys. Go back to that 1983 Daytona 500 with Kelly Yarborough, the in car.
I think they
He's got
drove
a
with windows,
chair.
crank
Yeah,
windows or
he's
windows,
just he's just in his
strapping on a
chair here.
seatbelt.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
not today.
So it is a great point that, yeah, they lost an icon and it just sucks for everybody. And he meant so much to our, the sport, you know, the region, all that good stuff. But the safety that came out of it, there's been some horrific crashes since. And,
Oh,
you know,
just within the last year, like
within,
I could
yeah,
think
within the
about
last year,
Was it Charlotte? Was it Charlotte or somewhere over the summer? There was a car. You and I talked about it too, because I remember
it's
watching,
Daytona.
yeah, Daytona. So
Yeah.
we watched the crash in slow mo to
It's
count the number
unreal.
of times this car goes in the air and flips. And I think
Yep.
it goes through the grass,
Yep.
pops up in the air, does three flips, hits the grass again,
The
does another
centrifugal
three
force
flips.
builds.
It's just
Yeah.
and
It's
then
unreal.
it's like a skater on ice when their body gets tighter and they start spinning
It just
faster.
got
Like
tighter and tighter and
that's what
tighter.
this thing did 13 times. I think it ends up
Yeah, Ryan
flipping.
Priest
Yeah,
did it this
unbelievable.
this summer. You have in 2020, I think it is, right before COVID shuts the world down. Ryan Newman gets hit directly at 190 miles an hour into the cage where he's
Hmm.
sitting. Once again, no shot. He survives that thing in
Because of the technology. It's
previous
just
technology. So
mm,
there's just, gosh, you hate to lose people.
Well, and he wasn't the
advance.
first
But
either. Like there was
oh,
there,
it
if
was
I
an
remember
awful
right, there was a
time.
couple years or a couple like month stretch where someone in Formula One had just lost their life, and I was like, wow, that never happens in NASCAR. You see
Yeah.
that like these horrific crashes in
Oof.
Formula One and IndyCar, and
Yep.
then all of a sudden, it happens in NASCAR like what felt like a few
Yeah.
weeks later.
I believe the year before they had lost Richard Petty's grandson.
Yeah, yeah,
Kyle's son died
yeah,
in a wreck in the exact same format.
yeah.
I can't say the word, a basal skull fracture or something
Right,
like that. They
right.
both died of the same thing, right around that
Wild,
time. And you're just like, pooh,
man.
and
Crazy.
you know, and now you you really don't even think about it. You see these wrecks, you're like, oh yeah, he's gonna walk out of here, no
We'll be
biggie,
fine.
yeah.
It's
But
wild.
it is, and like I say, I had I watched my Daytona 500, but I wasn't going to watch much else. Memorial Day, Coke 600, it's local down the street. We would sometimes watch that because you would get the Formula One race, and then you get the Indy 500, and then you get the Coke 600. So we would watch that one as well, but we just weren't as invested as we were as a kid.
Yeah,
And part of that was he wasn't there anymore.
yeah.
And once again, I love Sterling Marlin. Sterling had one opportunity to possibly win a championship, and he got hurt. So he was never that guy, and I liked him because he drove for Piedmont when he was young. Dale Earnhardt Jr. once again,
That's who I latched on to. Like
brought loyalties
that's
to
yeah.
him, and he was a great driver, but wasn't the same.
No
Was not gonna.
championships.
And he wins the two Bush
Yeah. And
championships,
that
but
nothing in
he's close.
yeah,
One year he gets that's a
second or third.
I think it's third, but
Yeah.
he curses in a victory lane, and they dock him
Knock 'em
like
points. Yeah.
25 points for this
Yeah.
stupidest thing ever, and he never recovers from that. And you're like, you
Why?
find him 5 grand if you want to, but
Points in the champion
points
like right.
in the championship
There's
run?
some wild mismanagement of NASCAR that goes on.
Absolutely. To who at the time had become the most popular driver. Let's find him for cursing in
Right.
victory lane,
Right.
points. But yeah, same deal. I latched a hold of him. And to be fair, I came back during COVID, started watching it again. I have not found that same person. I now watch it as just entertainment.
Yeah.
I think there's more people you don't like than you
Yeah.
do.
It's so
It's kind
true.
of got that
Isn't that
wrestling
true?
feel,
Yeah.
but
There's more
there's
heels to the sport.
nobody I have just been, oh my gosh,
I
this is my favorite drive. The Ryan Blaney will come
yeah.
into this season as the reigning champion. He's a good dude. He's got Star Wars tattoos. I like that. I've never been a Ford guy, and
Right.
he drives
Right.
for Ford. You root for
I
Earnhardt.
feel
You
that way
kind
about
of
Toyota. I feel like
shouldn't.
there's a lot of like, we don't want foreign cars in NASCAR. So like everyone that drives a Toyota gets,
I had a
immediately on
Toyota
the
and I
bad list.
hated it. I hated that car. And so you're like, man, why do you drive for Toyota?
So related to this favorite driver conversation, I want to ask
Yeah.
you what you think. The number three,
Yeah.
it goes away immediately. When Goodwrench comes back, I'm so unfortunate, obviously for a lot of people. Goodwrench as a sponsor has to go away for a minute.
Yep.
When it does come back, I love what they did with it. First of all, so they bring
Hmm.
it back to Kevin Harvick.
Yes.
Picks up that seat for Richard Childress, and not only do they change the number, they go from a black car to a white car,
It did.
which feels like a nod. I'm getting like chills thinking
Sure.
about it.
Yeah.
Like kind of what they did. That is an iconic color, an iconic number. We're not gonna do anything to mess with the legacy and what it means to people. Um,
Absolutely.
it goes away for a long
Very long
time,
time.
until and it gives me mixed feelings about it. It's back on the track today, Austin Dillon.
Hmm.
Seeing it back in NASCAR, it's like the one sport that won't retire a number.
Because they're limited. Yes.
Right. They can't, which I understand, but I feel like if there's one you're gonna,
Yeah.
it's that one. But
Yeah.
the other side of the argument is it's Richard Childress's grandson driving it. And I
Yep.
know how much Earnhardt meant to him.
Sure.
And I'm sure there's conversations, that go on with like Dale Jr. and everyone else in the sport to make sure, like, is this okay? Are we doing right by,
Yeah.
the number? But it's still just, it feels dirty to me to see it back in.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you said. I have no problem with him using the number. I think he should have changed the
The
font.
design of it. Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
same look. It's the
It is
same
the
look and
same.
feel.
It's the
Yeah.
same font. And, granted, Austin is in Victory Lane in 98. That's his grandfather. That, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that he has lineage that,
Ties them
few
to that.
have.
And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. He comes to his grandfather, Junior comes through the dad, but there's very few people that could actually pull this
Right.
off.
Right.
And, but I wish they would have
Done
changed the
something to
font.
be different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. You bring up the white, car. There's a great story there. So Kevin Hart had signed at Richard Childress. I think he was going to run. That was going to be 5 races,
Mhm.
similar to what Dale Earnhardt Jr. did. And I think he was going to drive the 30
Mm.
car for AOL of all things.
Yeah.
AOL had enough money to sponsor a NASCAR car back then. So the 30 AOL car. Well, when they put him in the car, the last thing, there was no 3, and so they went to NASCAR. I was like, what's the first number without a 3 in it? And it was 29. And so he was prepared to drive the number 30 car for 5 races that year. And so they put the 29, and he kept the 29 for the whatever 10
Almost
years
duration of
he's,
his career.
yeah,
Yeah.
for he changes to 4 when he moves to
Yeah.
Ford, but for the rest of his time there at RCR, he keeps this random 29. So but I always thought that was a very interesting thing. Is like, we're not putting a 3 on this car because they own 30, because they were going to be 3, 30, and 31, because they had the 31 car as well
Yep.
with Skinner. And but that, nope, no more 3s, man. So
It's
29
wild.
is what it was. But yeah, I agree. I seeing the 3 on the track is cool. I just wish it was a different font.
Other ways the sport's changed.
Yeah.
There's been a lot. We kind of highlighted it a little bit, but it kind of gets back to the different eras discussion. Of what it was to what it is back in the day. And I feel like we got to throw that in there at least once an episode. Just that phrase,
Yeah.
back in the day. NASCAR was a very straightforward sport, right? In terms of points and how
Yeah.
things added up, and everyone, from top to bottom, you accumulated points over the course of a season based on a wide variety of factors: finishing position, laps led, all sorts of quality,
Yep.
whatever it was. Your points added up from week to week over the course of the year, and at the end of the year, whoever had the most points, there's your champion.
Yep.
Today,
Yeah.
man, they've really muddled it. So, like,
Very
getting
convoluted,
getting back
hard to
to,
understand.
there's now, which I to the traditionalist. This is
Hmm.
again where I think it's very similar to that baseball conversation, right?
Yeah.
The traditionalists of the sport, almost makes it really difficult to follow. Like, not only have car designs changed, and like you've got Mustangs, you've got Camaros, you got like there's that
Yeah.
side of it, which is awesome, and I think fun to follow, kind of the evolution of the racing technology, but the evolution of the sport to where now you've got stages of races. That so a 300 lap race, let's just make it easy numbers to divide. A 300 lap race will have 3 stages every 100 laps. And then
Mhm.
there's like a break, or like not even a break. I mean, they keep racing,
Mhm.
right? But like
Yeah.
it's just
But they do throw a
like,
caution.
right. They throw a caution that it's like the stage is over. Everyone gets a chance to like reset, get fresh tire, whatever it is,
Yeah.
refuel. Um, so they
But
got different
it's
stages,
coming, to
right?
where
And
typically a caution, you don't know it's coming.
right.
So they can prepare, hey, we're going to have a caution on this lap. So we
Yep.
know we're going to be
So
prepared for do this.
like they've got different stages that happen now to a playoff format, and then
Hmm.
eliminations that happen throughout the playoffs. You can like how you qualify for that. You might not be, so say it's what they do, 16 cars, 12 cars, something like that qualify for the playoffs.
16 for the
16,
first round. They
right?
break it down
So,
to
but
12
can it
after
be
3.
more? Like, it can be more. Like, if you're not
Mm-mm.
in the top 16, but you win a race, like, don't you auto qualify, or didn't they used to let you auto qualify for
The
the playoffs if
first
you won a race?
16 who win
That's
qualify.
it.
Yeah. If 17 were to win, you then go to points. It's never happened before.
Okay, so
Yeah. They've only had it happen to where 16 won, where you had to win one time.
Okay.
The majority of the time you have 13, 14 win and then 2 come in on points.
Gotcha.
But one year, I think it was last year, they actually had 16 winners. So
So
you
that was
actually
it.
had to win to get in. Yes.
Yeah. That's why I'm thinking of it. But like
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different stipulations now
There
around
is.
it. Which kind of I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Um, I I heard an interesting story that made it make more sense. That it was conceived by TV.
Hmm.
The TV brought that package to them. So it they I think they offered more money if they did it,
They want
to
drama.
where
They want
they do
drama at
want
the end of the year and
they wanted
viewers and
drama at the end of the year because they were, competing with football.
mhm.
And they, if you had the champion with 2 races to go, the last 2 races were meaningless. It it just lost everything for the TV partner to be able to promote. Hey, we've got the last race. It doesn't mean anything. The champion is already Rob Stock, And so the TV partner came in and said, "What if we were able to do this?" And they went with it. And they've tweaked it a little bit. The first
Yeah, it
year they
feels like they're
did it.
still trying to get to a point where they're okay with
Yeah.
it. Like they're happy
Yeah.
with the
I think I
format.
can say the first year they were like, okay, hey, these 10 drivers are in and they're going to run 10 races, and whoever's leading after 10 races wins. And so that's where they did it. And then I think maybe 7, 8 years ago, 16,
Go to
17
this
is when they went to
elimination
this,
format.
they went to the
Yeah.
elimination format. And it is a gimmick. Absolutely. Huge gimmick. Not crazy about it, and not crazy, and to be fair, this year was the first year that one of the 4 finalists did not win the final race. You usually have to win the final race to win the championship. And this year it didn't happen. Ryan Blaney finished second.
Hmm.
But you're like, it is very gimmicky. I'm not crazy about it. I will say this: I don't know this person at all, but I'm going to promote this. I love the X feed NASCAR Winston Cup Series standings, and this
Of what it
person,
would have been.
yeah,
They've been tracking what it would have been like if it was traditional.
they have been tracking it forever
That's
since
awesome.
this new format switched over. So William Byron would have actually won the championship this year. And I love it. I love the fact that you can go back and say, and
Here's who
because
would
the
have
rules
won.
were completely different back then. You got
Yeah.
180 points for winning, you got 5 bonus points for leading, all
Yep.
these different things. And this person goes through and calculates all that crap
Yeah.
and comes up with a winner. But I love it. It's a great X feed. I would say if you're a NASCAR fan, if you haven't followed him, follow him. It's amazing. Because I love to send that to my mom. My mom's still loves
That's
NASCAR
awesome.
racing.
That's so
I'd be
cool.
like, hey mom, Chase would
Here's
have won the championship this year if we had the old rules, because he would have won last year. And
wow.
I think uh
Does he
who was
even
it?
who does he get to the final? Like the final round of
No,
no?
not
Like
this
not
year. He
even
didn't even
close?
he didn't make the playoffs because he got hurt. But he broke his leg skiing
Yeah.
back in
Oh,
in
jeez.
March. But so I'm not crazy about the gimmicky aspect of it. I understand why they did it. We're all driven. Sports is driven by money now.
Mhm.
TV partners are going to offer so much money. We're going to take it. And if the TV partner comes and says, "Hey, we're going to
This
give
is what we're
you,
gonna do. And this is
yeah,
what we're gonna
$20 million
take.
if you do this. We're going to give you 100 if you do this." You're going to take it, and you're gonna go that route, and you're going to own it. And that's what they do. They own it as if it's the greatest thing ever. And it is a
Not. It is.
little gimmicky,
Yeah.
so that's nobody else in the racing world does that really except for them. But they also get more eyeballs in America on their events than anybody else does in racing. So I don't know if they use that as ammo to say, see, it works.
Yeah. It's
But I'm not that crazy about it either.
no.
Um,
I'm with you. A
but
100% with you. Like it makes it hard to get back. Not to be fair, I still kind of like you. I think in that mid 20 teens era of I'm watching on the big events that I know,
yep,
especially because of the birthdays around Daytona every year too. Like there's a couple times where it lands on February 24th, and I'm like, this is wife asks what I want. I want the remote and I want the screen in front of me to be on
That's
Fox or
right.
whatever it is, so I could sit there and if I fall asleep, I fall asleep, but I'm watching the Daytona 500. So like it's great,
So,
but
depending upon when you're listening to this, we hope to possibly do a remote from Daytona this year. A few updates for Doug has been trying to cross off bucket list things
yeah,
for a little while now, and I got to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame
yep,
last June.
it's on
We'll
your
be
slate.
doing we'll be doing some other podcasts on some cool stuff and music coming up. But I have Daytona 500 on my bucket list as well, and if everything works out,
You'll be there.
this February I will be there to do a remote from
So that's
500.
awesome because we're both crossing off bucket list items.
Hmm.
These last
Hmm.
two episodes we've done, you
That's right.
mentioned Daytona 500. That's one of mine as well. And it was
Yeah.
always my dad and I always talked about a graduation gift would be us driving down to Florida and
Yes.
doing that, right? So
Yes.
I've graduated from high school and college now, and we still have. I got to find something else to graduate from.
You got to graduate for
Get a
something else.
certificate so that we can finally do this. But that is one of mine. The other is a WrestleMania, and it's
There
coming
you
and it's
go.
happening, and we'll be there. So nice of us to both be able. Maybe is it really remote if I'm doing it from Philly?
We've talked a lot of stuff. We talked to our eras. There was a whole, NASCAR starts in 70,
Oh,
70, 70, two is when the Winston Cup kind of takes over, but it ran for 23 years before then. We haven't even hit on any of
I
that
have.
stuff. And there's
Yeah,
so many cool stories from those days of, some of these iconic, bootleggers essentially who run in moonshine here in
Ralph
the
Earnhardt.
yeah,
Throw
yeah.
Ralph Earnhart into that
Yeah, you
group,
got
right?
you got exactly. Your Junior Johnson's out of Wilkesboro in the foothills of North Carolina
The dirt
running
track
moonshine.
racing,
Yeah,
like
all that
all
stuff.
that stuff.
You had all those amazing eras as well. It just not as fluent in them, so we didn't hit on them as much. We focused essentially on the eras that we grew up in. But I've read several books about those guys from the 50s and 60s, and it's some wild stuff. You mentioned lost speedways.
Yeah.
There is footage on YouTube. You can go watch the first Daytona 500 on the pavement. I think it's 59.
Hmm.
So the 58 Daytona 500 on dirt on sand
Yeah.
is out there to watch. You
Yep.
can go watch
Incredible.
on YouTube these cameras, these guys going down the beach, and there's just people like
Sand
sunbathing
fly.
out
Yeah.
there, as they go by. Like,
Sand kicking up as they
if
come
this
around the
dude
tight
loses
corners.
it, he's into you. There's no wall here. So you had all these amazing eras as well. But I will, we like to highlight what our favorite era is, and I'm gonna, you had the wrestling one, so I'm gonna go to you first on this one.
Yeah.
What would be
I
your
think
favorite era?
if I'm close to growing up in the era that I would pick, but I would probably scoot back like not a full generation, but maybe 10 to 15 years. Like probably
Mm-hmm.
what you grew up in, right? So like the late 70s to 90s is probably when I'd pick for a specific reason, and it's because of, they may not have been like the Gordon Earnhardt rivalry,
Yeah,
um, but the Earnhardt Petty being in,
sure.
in racing at the same time, and just knowing some of the other names, the Yarboroughs, and
Yeah.
just
Or young Waltrip,
yeah, Daryl, right?
Yeah.
Giggity giggity, let's go
Yeah.
racing, boys. Like just the names that were around, and I feel like that to me is like to relate it to another sport. I grew up during Manning, and we talked about this during football, right?
Mm,
I grew up during
yeah.
Manning and Breeze and Brady, and that's what
Right.
I know, and McNabb, and that to me would be like the Youngs, and even Montana's, and more of the Elway and Aikman's heyday, as opposed to like
Mm-hmm.
the end of their careers. I feel like I got to see the end as opposed to
Yeah.
like when they were in the thick of it. So I think that late 70s to early 90s would be the era that I'd pick.
That's pretty awesome. 79, we talked about 92 being this iconic year. 79 is iconic as well. It's Earnhardt's rookie year. I believe it's Harry Gant's rookie year as well, maybe. But you get Darrell Waltrip, Richard
Mm,
Petty, and Cale Yarborough on this. And, another free plug. I've got this book behind me. It's all about the 1979 season.
Yeah.
I, it's called He Crashed Me, So I Crashed Him Back. It's great, but it follows the 79 season, this iconic year in NASCAR of, once again, rookie Dale Earnhardt. Darrell Waltrip has a huge points lead, and then he starts having some problems, and Richard Petty catches him, actually passes him and wins the championship. And, it's amazing. So I love your choice there. I think, to be fair, I kind of grew up in the golden age. The
Yeah.
80s
100%.
of just, like you say, these names. We still had Yarborough, we still had Petty. Waltrip dominates the early 80s, but then Earnhardt kicks in 86. You got your villain Bill Elliott in 88, who is he's the fastest stock car ever. I think in 85 they
Yep.
eventually start slowing them down. But you have, Allison is huge in the 70s, and his son Davey, start showing up in those late years of the 80s as well. These iconic sponsors of Wrangler and Coors, and you couldn't even get Coors in North Carolina, but here's the Coors car,
Right.
um, you know, Tide,
Schraders and
Tide. Oh
Burtons and
yeah, Schrader.
Labontes, like
But
just the names of
I can
those
remember
eras.
Tide
Yeah.
showing up and it being like,
Yeah.
Tide.
Yeah.
What are you on a car for? And then the next thing you know, it was like completely normal. This beautiful orange car, out there, and it just was. It was a cool era for these
The
names,
growth.
and
Like the
in
growth of the
growth,
sport too.
massive. And I will say the kids today are probably great, but it just hasn't grabbed a hold like those guys
Yeah.
did. These kids grew up in a different era. Lots of video game kids out there. Um, they they're mouthy. They'll
Yeah.
mouth off to each other
Yeah.
on Twitter, but these guys are not getting out and throwing punches. And those guys would get out and tussle and then crack a beer and be like, "Hey, man, it's okay."
Right. Hang out in the
And
infield in their
yeah,
trailers.
exactly, exactly. And so that 80s era of just domination up into the Days of Thunder movie is just, boy, it's pretty tough to beat as an era of NASCAR, racing. And that's
There's no
probably going to be my
I
choice as
can't
well.
I can't look at Kyle Busch and, think happy thoughts.
Yeah,
Personally, he's like villain number one in terms of like the type of personality and individual today that makes me not want to latch on to a
right.
specific driver or the sport
He,
really in general.
yeah,
So it's just
fair. He
he's like the start. I feel like he's the start of the whiny baby era of NASCAR.
very much so, because there's plenty of great villains from the 80s, but
But they don't whine and complain and like,
exactly.
and then look for retribution on the track next week. Like
Yeah.
it's just it's wild.
Yeah. So it's just not the same. They just don't have those characters. And all, back then you had, those guys knew how to turn a wrench.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys today,
Tell
there's just
tell
like,
one
I
of
don't know
these
what's going. It's a
kids,
little tight or
yeah,
loose. Like I don't know. I don't
exactly.
know what's going on here. Right. It's just
I think it's doing this because the computer program is giving me error code 34.
right. What?
Listen to the radio, and he's like, "Yeah, we're in program 31." What? You're in what? So it's just a different time. But granted, times move on. We're lucky to have it at all. There's
Yeah.
very few cars even sold in America anymore. It's all
Right.
trucks and minivans,
Wait
and
till we get
so
the NASCAR,
exactly,
the Tesla 500, where it's just
yeah.
all, self-driving cars.
Or we're cruising around in minivan racing. Oh, they'll get minivans out here, because that's what people buy. The SUV
Oh,
racing.
well, but before
Well,
we
my
go,
Chevy Yukon
yeah,
was running great today.
before we go, I want to open up the treasure chest real quick,
Okay.
for both of us, because I'm sure, I've got some legend. I mentioned, back during the discussion about Earnhardt, like what my room was like. So I have some, in my mind, legendary memorabilia.
Sure.
Do you have a piece that stands out to you?
Most of mine were shirts.
Mhm.
And the fact that you still have that shirt on is incredible, because when I lost interest, I
They
chunked
went.
it all. Yeah.
Mm.
But I had, like I say, that that picture I showed you is a beautiful Dale Earnhardt
Yeah.
shirt in the Wrangler car. I had the Sterling
Yeah.
Marlin Piedmont car. I got that shirt that you got on there for every race I went to. So I had multiple Martinsville ones. I had that Talladega 500
Oh,
shirt from 1987. So most of my memorabilia was shirts.
yeah,
Um,
that's fair.
Trading cards had started to come in, Max and stuff like that, but I don't have as much of that sort of stuff. Mine was mainly, t-shirts.
So I must have been a spoiled little kid. I have enough of the like, um, the scaled cars to
Yeah,
probably set up my own, field of racing. Packed away in the attic somewhere in a box.
sure.
All those cars that are around. There are So other than the signed ticket stub that I told
Hmm.
you about with Junior,
Amazing.
yeah, right. There are a couple of items, two items specifically that stand out to me, and one is one that it lived in a box for about, oh man, 16 years before I decided to, put it on a wall in my own house. More because I didn't want to get my ass beat for taking it out of the box. So it was like one of those Christmas gifts that was given to me, but I feel like it was more for the parents, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. So we lose Earnhardt February 2001. In
Hmm.
December of 2000, there's a run of about 2,500 lithographs. He had just signed with Warner Brothers and was going to do a whole bunch of Warner Brothers, themed things over the course of the upcoming year. There
Wow.
is a lithograph of him. It's called the Intimidators. Him. His nickname obviously being the Intimidator.
Yeah.
So there's a picture called the Intimidators. It's got it written across the top, and it's him leaning on his car in pit road while around him are all of the Looney Tune characters as
Like
his
Bugs Bunny and
picture.
stuff like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Bugs Bunny, Daffy, Tweety. There Marvin the Martian, I think, is in there.
Yes.
All around the Tasmanian Devil, all around his car, doing pit crew work on his car. Um, in this photo. So it's like half real because it's him in the car, but also
Sure.
like cartoon around him. It's signed, and there is a picture of him signing it that came with the lithograph. 2,500, a run of
Wow.
2,500. I'd have to check what number I have specifically, but he doesn't sign them all because he doesn't get around to signing them all. So there's a limited number of signed versions of this lithograph. And one happens to be hanging on my wall, and I swear every time my parents see it, they want to smack me for taking it out of the box. So and a
Wow.
certificate of authenticity and all that sort of stuff that's with it that are attached to the back of this lithograph. That's
That
one.
is amazing.
Probably the top. I probably led with the big one, but another, to tie football and racing together. I have a NASCAR helmet in the design of an Eagles helmet. So it's like
That
and
Labani.
it's Kelly green. So it's a
Oh,
Kelly green helmet with like the Eagles wings on the top of it and like a
yes.
NASCAR visor. Signed by Gibbs and Bobby Labonte. And
Bobby
this
Labani.
is in Labonte wins a championship. I want to
He
say
does.
in 02, 03. Years might be off there, but so I get this thing a year or two before he wins that championship. And that's
Wow.
sitting in a case right now out in the open for those that visit to enjoy. So um
That is a great one as
yeah,
well.
so two pieces that are, I've got a lot of like signed, I mentioned the Benson, and there's
Yeah.
other, I other items like Earnhardt had. They did something around the All-Star game, baseball All-Star game. So there's like a
Hmm.
run of like baseball themed cars, and I have a small scale like 164 Earnhardt All-Star game car that's in a baseball container. So you open the
Wow.
baseball and it's signed by Junior. So like a lot of that kind of stuff. But those two items, the picture and the
That's
helmet, absolutely stand out.
amazing.
Yeah, as just treasure chest pieces for me. So
See, mine are all memories.
yeah.
I don't have anything like that. That's
Ah,
incredible.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
cool things, but to throw them out there and some neat stuff. So it's neat to see just the importance that this sport again still holds for
Sport.
the both of us, right? So
That's right.
it's one that'll different era today, but we'll continue to follow and um I think enjoy in one way or another.
Absolutely. We'll keep going. Hopefully these guys will grow on us.
Oh, well, it's interesting, and to pick one, I'm not sure. I don't know that they will grow on us. There will never be another Intimidator. That's
No,
for sure. But um,
no.
neat to see that it's still around and that we get to enjoy, and generations moving forward hopefully will as well. But
Hopefully, you're going to have some interesting over the next 10 years. You're going to have the third generations of some of these guys. And in Earnhardt's case, the fourth generation of these. And that's what's going to be interesting when,
they come
Kelly's
back.
son
Yeah.
races. He's not, his last name isn't Earnhardt, but that's his grandfather.
Yeah.
And you're going to start seeing some of these folks come in, these fourth generation guys too. So it
It's
will
wild, man.
be interesting. Good stuff.
Well, hey, awesome conversation. Neat to dive into, a topic that was more your forte, but still one that, has a strong foothold on this side of the
Absolutely.
screen. So, neat to dive into it all with you, man.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Nice era.
Well, hey, until next time, keep it twisted.
That's right.